This presentation is on the American Revolution. This presentation is on the American Revolution. The colonies in Great Britain began to differ in life, thought, and interest. The British viewed the colonies as an economic resource and used the Navigation Acts, a series of laws that restricted foreign shipping for trade between England and the colonies, to regulate commerce in their favor. In 1793, the Treaty of Paris ended the French and Indian Wars, a conflict in between Great Britain and France in colonial America. In the eyes of the French and Great Britain, it was seen as a small part of the major struggle between the two countries. However, in the colonies, it meant immediate and real danger from the French and Native American raids. At the end of the war, the colonial considered themselves more military competent and less dependent on Great Britain. They became more concerned with their own problems and institutions. Therefore, the Treaty of Paris and the end of the war removed the threat for the colonies, but it also tightened Great Britain's political control. In 1765, Great Britain passed the Stamp Act to raise revenues for a new military force. It was a direct tax that required paper documents such as cards, pamphlets, newspapers, diplomas, and marriage licenses to bear a stamp. The British people had a higher stamp tax for 2 generations, but in the eyes of the colonists, it seemed to revoke their basic rights. The colonists argued that they were not represented in Parliament. The British government argued that every member in Parliament represented every British subject, including the colonists. The colonists asked the King and Parliament to repeal the legislation. It was ignored until the colonists' widespread non-importation policy of British goods caused unemployment and economic turmoil in England. The British Parliament appealed this tax but passed an act establishing their right to tax the colonies. This relationship strained as the colonies declared that taxation without representation was tyranny. Then, in 1767, the British Parliament passed the Townshend Acts, a tax on many imports. It was partly comprised of the Tea Tax and the Quartering Act of 1765, which allowed British troops to be housed in suspected smugglers' homes and required the colonists to house, feed, and help soldiers. The Townshend Act resulted in outrage from the colonies. Great Britain responded with the seizure of John Hancock's ship in 1768, the Boston Massacre in 1770, and the burning of the HMS in 1772. The Townshend Acts were repealed in 1770, but the discontent with the monopoly of the East India Company led to the Boston Tea Party in 1773. Parliament punished the colonists with the Coercive Acts, better known as the Intolerable Acts, limiting their political and geographical freedom. Most importantly, it swept away many of the Massachusetts chartered rights and closed Boston's harbor until the tea that was destroyed in the Boston Tea Party was paid for. This resulted in the First Continental Congress, who wished to persuade the British government to recognize their rights. It is important to note that they did not want independence yet, only a return to happy days. The colonists listed petitions for the king and refused to import British goods until their grievances were met. The Revolution officially began in 1775 with the battles of Lexington and Concord, when a fatal fight broke out between British soldiers and colonials. This marked the beginning of the Siege of Boston, in which the colonials tried to win back Boston from Britain. On May 10, 1775, Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys joined with Benedict Arnold's forces to take Fort Ticonderoga from the British. General Gage of the British tried to break the siege by sending troops to Bunker Hill and Dorchester Heights. After learning about this plan, the colonists tried to fortify Bunker Hill, resulting in the Battle of Bunker Hill on June 17, 1775. This was a pivotal moment for the colonists because although the British eventually won the battle, it was at the cost of many casualties. The Second Continental Congress met and declared George Washington as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Armed Forces. He became a symbol of the Revolution, not for his military competence, but because of his amazing strength, character, and moral force. As the war progresses, the divide between the Loyalists, those loyal to Great Britain, and the revolutionaries became more distinct. The Loyalists were numerous and various in every colony. They included small farmers, large landowners, office holders, and professionals. They were often branded as traitors, and their property was sometimes confiscated. Some fled to Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, Canada, and England. In January 1776, Thomas Paine wrote the pamphlet Common Sense for the Revolutionary Cause. It was one of the most influential pamphlets ever written and called out the inconsistencies of the colonists and argued for a republic, not a monarchy. Later that year, the Declaration of Independence was written by Thomas Jefferson and adopted by Congress on July 4, 1776. It was essentially a justification of the Revolution to the world. It provided core principles based on natural rights, an outline of ideal government, and list of grievances to King George and Parliament. The British lost Boston in 1776 but captured New York City and Philadelphia. Then in 1777, the Continental Army, under General Horatio Gates, defeated the British Army at the Battle of Saratoga. This American victory is commonly regarded as the decisive battle of the war. After the victory at Saratoga, the French decided to come to the aid of the Americans. Benjamin Franklin and the French foreign minister signed a treaty for an alliance in 1778. They sent soldiers, sailors, supplies, and money. In 1779, Spain entered the war against Great Britain, but were not directly aiding the United States. Meanwhile, in the South, the British took Savannah in 1778. In 1780, Sir Henry Clinton attacked and took Charleston. It was the last big American port and a huge victory. Then, Charles Cornwallis went on the Carolina campaign, beating Horatio Gates at Camden in August 1780. The British dominated in the South except for guerrilla bands led by Francis Marion, Andrew Pickens, and Thomas Sumter. The situation darkened for the Americans when dissatisfaction of Congress's efficiency, lack of funds and food, political disagreement, and the strains of a long-drawn war spread disloyalty and doubt. It created a division among the people. It reached a low point for morale in 1780 when Benedict Arnold committed treason. Additionally, lack of pay and shortages of clothing and food caused a mutiny in January 1781. The situation lightened when Nathanael Greene replaced Gates as the commander of the Carolina campaign. Under Greene, Daniel Morgan and Thaddeus Cusco forced Cornwallis out of Carolina and into Virginia. This opened up for the Yorktown campaign, the closing military operation of the war. Cornwallis had fortified Yorktown and waited for reinforcements from Sir Henry Clinton in New York. During this time, a French fleet led by Admiral de Grasse blockaded the Chesapeake Bay, cornering Cornwallis and defeating the British naval forces. George Washington, Rochambeau, and Lafayette came from the north with American and French troops. Cornwallis tried to escape but failed. Outnumbered and surrounded, he surrendered on October 19, 1781, ending the American Revolution. The Treaty of Paris recognized the new nation in 1783. The United States was suffering and trying to recover from the war, as well as struggling with problems under the Articles of Confederation. It was an agreement among the 13 states that served as its first constitution and established the United States as a unit. Although the United States leaned toward conservatism, guiding principles were liberty and democracy. The American Revolution had an influence on European thought. It brought democracy to the minds that brought about the French Revolution and contributed to a revolution for Spain's American colonies.